this video is dedicated to the last non-renewable source that we will be discussing in this module, and that's nuclear energy. Nuclear energy is quite controversial because of the harrowing events that has happened in its history. Well, now, when we are talking about nuclear energy, there are two types. You could either get energy through nuclear fusion, or the combination of nucleus or nuclei, or you can get fission, energy through fission. So that's the separation of the nucleus. Whenever we conduct fission, large amounts of energy is being produced, and we use radioactive materials in order to produce the maximum amount of energy. Now, these are not stable materials. Of course, it must be conducted in controlled environments, in nuclear reactors, in specific or well-designed power plants. The radioactive elements that we use for nuclear energy are namely uranium and plutonium. So we split the these radioactive elements, in order to get energy. So these radioactive materials or elements are mined from the geosphere, and then we use it in our nuclear power plants. So whenever we split atoms, right, it produces large amounts of energy in the forms of heat, as well, of course, as radioactive materials. But if you can control the amount of heat the fission or fusion produces, as well as the radioactivity it produces, then you will have a very stable source of energy. So again, these processes must be done in specialized power plants, and then we also have to isolate the radioactive waste products. So how do we do this? Now you have your reactor, which is the heart of your nuclear power plant, and this is where the fusion or fission happens. Now, as I said, the fission or fusion produces a lot of heat, and you have to control that. So it's either you're gonna need a source of power. Okay, you're going to cool it, use water to cool it, and in the process, you also produce steam. So controlling the amount of heat your reactor is producing, and also producing steam in the process. And as we have said in the introduction, we will use steam in order to make our turbine function, and that in itself will create the electrical energy. So as long as the radioactive materials can produce a lot of heat through fusion and fission, then we have a stable source of electricity. Now, since we have a lot of energy actually being produced by our radioactive materials, you need cooling towers. So these large structures that you see in maybe movies or pictures are not smoke. They're not producing smoke. They're actually trying to cool water. So the materials that are emitted in our cooling towers are actually steam, because they are trying to cool the water that has been heated up by the nuclear reactor. Okay, so before you get really close-minded and say, oh, nuclear energy is really bad for the environment, take a look at the advantages of nuclear energy. So it's one of the most efficient and stable sources of energy. So this infographic shows you how much energy or electricity nuclear energy can provide. So in comparison to just uranium pellet, at the size of the tip of a pencil eraser, that already produces electricity with the same amount of 400 kilograms of coal, or 410 liters of oil, or 350 cubic meters of natural gas. So nuclear energy, since we are splitting atoms, it produces a lot of energy. So in comparison to your fossil fuels, nuclear energy is way more efficient in producing electricity. Now, in the Philippine settings, the Philippines has never used nuclear energy. We built the Bataan nuclear power plant in the time of the Marcos regime. However, it was never opened. Before the Bataan nuclear power plant could function, it was closed down because of, well, corruption concerns, to be blunt about it. Um, so Marcos built the nuclear power plant this nuclear power plant in answer to a world recession that was happening back in the 1970s or the 1960s. So we built this to answer the rising cost of electricity, but due to the issues linked to the government and politics, the Bataan power plant was never opened and was never used. Japan actually have acknowledged how good the design of the Bataan nuclear power plant, but now it's way too old. We cannot use it anymore. There are also some rumors that they're saying that it's near a fault line, so it's quite dangerous to use, but that is actually falsified and has been corrected by the director of FIVOX, so not Renato Solidum. So it's not near a fault line. It's actually in a perfect spot. So it's in far from the city and it's nearby water, so you have a stable source of water which can cool your reactor. So it would have been ideal if it had functioned decades ago, but yeah, we were never able to use it. So there were, during the past presidencies, every president has tried to revisit the Bataan nuclear power plant and checked if there is some possibility to reopen it, but there will be some advantages and disadvantages if our country will start using nuclear power. Okay, so some problems when it comes to nuclear energy. Of course, there's a limited supply. Nuclear energy is still considered as a non-renewable resource because there will still be a limit of how much radioactive materials we can harvest or mine from the environment. So if those nuclear or those radioactive materials run out, what then? We can no longer use nuclear energy. The risk is also there. The environmental hazards such as pollution or radioactive waste and the possibility of meltdown in case of nuclear power. So the world has been traumatized by stories of nuclear or the possibility of nuclear meltdowns in the past. So people are quite scared of nuclear energy. So there's a possibility that radiation may leak into the environment, so damaging the vicinity of the nuclear power plant. There's also the concerns of how will we throw the radioactive materials produced during the process, because after fusion there will still be some materials left. So what do you do with that? There has been some proposals to just bury them deep in deserts away from society in general, but of course there will be some disadvantages if that's what we're gonna do. So environmental concern: no proper disposal measures for radioactive waste which are harmful to the environment. So that's what it's trying to highlight, like what will we do with the radioactive waste, because they are dangerous, they should be contained, they should not be mixed with the environment. So unless like a country has a very good disposal measure of this radioactive waste, then nuclear energy will pose more of a threat than an advantage. In addition, the country must also be responsible and capable enough to control the nuclear energy and remove any risk of possible meltdowns. So Japan in the past has a lot, and yeah, Japan has a lot of nuclear power plants. And I think one of the horror stories of 2007 is Fukushima, the meltdown of the nuclear power plant in Fukushima. So what happened there is, if you can recall, in 2007 there was a tsunami. So it was bigger than they thought. So they didn't anticipate that Fukushima, the nuclear power plant, is near the ocean. So the nuclear power plant was flooded, and since the systems were flooded, the reactor overheat, and there you have a reactor meltdown. So it resulted to there's a lot of environmental impact in terms of Fukushima. It's hard to quantify how many people actually died or had premature death because of the Fukushima event. But some heart-wrenching stories, like after the Fukushima event, the old people of Japan volunteered to clean the nuclear waste because if you were exposed to radioactive waste, it's possible that you will die within 20 or 30 years due to cancer because you were exposed to radiation. So the old people of Japan volunteered to clean the radioactive waste because they said they will die soon anyway, so might as well die for something good in order to protect the young people. So that's Japan for you. Seeing this event, knowing the events or what happened to Fukushima, you might be discouraged, but Japan was not discouraged. I mean, they are still operating nuclear energy to date. So there are still some other power plants that are still functioning, and they closed the other nuclear power plants that are prone to tsunami attacks. So they have identified safe locations, and yeah, they're still operating nuclear energy. So Japan is just one of the countries. Other countries that have nuclear power would be United States. France is leading in terms of nuclear. 75% of the electricity of France is from nuclear power, and they have not reported any casualties like this. So good on you, France. And then there is I have mentioned United States, China, and of course North Korea. Okay, so that's it for this video. Just want to focus on nuclear power for this video, and in the next one, we will be studying the renewable or alternative sources. Stay safe. Bye.